Hello and welcome to another installment of Coleman University's Professional Development Training Series on Instructor Fundamentals. This time we'll be examining testing, methods of testing, and test item development. We think you'll find this to be a very helpful and detail-filled class. Today we will take a quick look at the methodology of student cheating, an activity that, depending on the study, well over 70% of your students freely admit to. Knowing how they cheat should help us with methods to prevent their cheating. We will then look at the types of assessments that are available and how they are linked to Bloom's taxonomy. Finally, we will look at the methods of writing effective test items for the assessment of learning. Let's get started. While more prevalent than at any other time in the past, cheaters still cheat like they always have. There are some interesting new wrinkles, however. The classic hidden notes has now been expanded to where students will write answers in between their fingers or on the inside of their glasses. Some women have even been reported to writing answers on their inner thighs specifically to prevent male teachers from calling them out as cheaters. "You've written the answers on your legs" may get followed up by a sexual harassment claim. "Why were you looking at my thighs?" Many students find it easier just to sit behind the smart students than it is to study. All sorts of noise cues, from pencil taps to pen clicks, are used to communicate between students. In larger classes, stunt students appear to take the exam in place of the student that is getting the grade. Keeping files of old tests and papers, buying instructor guides from used bookstores all seem to be easier than studying. And finally, the most basic, whispering the answers to each other while a test is in progress. Going digital has just taken many of these former techniques and made them easier to use. While digital dictionaries and translators may seem helpful, since they have memories and students can store keywords and definitions in them, it converts all exams to open book if you allow their use. Some students claim they need to use music in order to take a test, and so plug in their earbuds just to listen to a recording of their own notes. The prevalence of cell phones and their text capability in the classroom allows students to text each other even from their pockets, the number of vibrations indicating which answer is the correct one. Online students have even been known to hire consultants to do simulations for them, let alone convincing an older student to take an online test for them. Students have cracked test banks from publisher sites, and many are available for free on the web. Most digital devices, phones, iPads, tablets, can create instant networks through infrared or Bluetooth links, converting an individual assessment into teamwork. As digital devices become more prevalent and smaller, it is more difficult to discover their use. So how do we minimize cheating, given the fact that so many of our students do it and feel justified in doing it because they perceive their life as too hard or because everyone else is doing it? While we can never prevent cheating 100% of the time, we can change the behaviors and conditions to make it more difficult. First, increase your watchfulness. Don't fall into a rut, looking up every 2 minutes, or bring a really good book to read during a test. Believe it or not, students are timing your inattention and using it to their advantage. While it does involve more work, printing and grading multiple versions of the exam reduces the benefit of the wandering eye and the Morris pencil. When giving assignments, try to come up with something very unusual so students can't simply find a copy on the web and change the author's name. Arrange the students in their seats. Have a seating chart so that students can't take advantage of their better prepared classmates. Do not tolerate any type of noise in the classroom to avoid signaling. Also remove any extraneous material on the desktops, which can also be used as a signal based on their position. If the test is excessively long, ensure that only one person leaves for a bathroom break and time them, understanding that while they're in the bathroom they may be accessing notes or calling a friend. Students have reported hiding their phones in the bathroom just for this case. Better not to allow any breaks at all. Finally, and most importantly, do not allow any kind of digital devices of any kind in the classroom while there's a test going on. If there is no safe storage outside the classroom, Have students place the devices in their backpacks or face down on the floor under their seats. In all cases, have them turn their phones and devices off. Switching gears then, how do we go about creating those assessments of students, the ones they're so desperately trying to cheat on? In our case, most assessments can be criterion referenced. That is, they are tied directly back to the learning outcomes and are a means of determining achievement of those outcomes. This is why the learning outcomes or objectives and how they're expressed are so important. They drive the assessment method. Describing could be assessed through an essay or a presentation or a threaded discussion posting, where write could only be assessed through an essay or posting, not through an oral presentation. Remember, learning outcomes should contain not only the behaviors and conditions under which they're demonstrated, but also the standards of performance we expect from our students. Since we're talking about learning outcomes, we're once again back to Bloom's taxonomy. Here is just a simple breakdown of the various possible assessments we can use to test knowledge verbs. Note that the verbs used in the outcomes must align with the assessment method, or we're not likely to be measuring the student achievement after all. We cannot make hard and fast rules about this, given the creative nature of instructors, but in general it would be hard to meet an outcome of outlining through the use of a multiple choice question. Outlining itself is a skill and needs to be demonstrated, not simply recognized. Sticking with Bloom, hence the flowers, let's look at some of the levels at which we have to develop test items. Determining the level, based on the action verb and the outcome, is the first step in developing test items. We'll look at just a few examples to give you the flavor. At the bottom level of learning is recognizing a fact, being able to distinguish which is the correct fact when given a list, for instance. It doesn't require deep mental processing, so requiring your students to complete an essay would be inappropriate to assess such an outcome. The next petal on our flower is recall, which does require deeper mental processing than does recognition. Students must bring forth the facts from their own memory and respond exactly. So again, this is not the deepest level of processing. In this case, a compare and contrast essay would not be appropriate. In comprehension, we start to get to the deeper levels of processing of the information. Here, it is perfectly acceptable to ask difficult essay questions and expect good answers in writing. In this case, asking a simple matching question or fill in the blank would be inappropriate to meet this level of outcome. An application level outcome can bring in a whole new type of test item, the performance exam. If there's a physical skill component to the class, this type of outcome would require us to watch the student actually performing the task. If it's a mental task, then we must create test items that replicate the work situation and the type of mental problems faced. For instance, should the outcome ask the students to apply prioritization skills to daily tasks, we may be able to get by with having the students create an ordered list. But a better assessment activity would be an inbox full of documents and emails that the students must process into a prioritized list, along with a short essay of why they ordered the items the way they did. The highest flower on our plant is analysis evaluation. This is the deepest level of processing, and it is unlikely to be able to be satisfied with anything less than a write-up of a case study or a research project. Not all classes will reach this level of outcome, but those that do can't really assess this with a multiple choice question. Well, the blooms come off, so now it's time to actually look at creating those test items, the assessment tools to measure the achievement of learning outcomes. You see here that there are 6 basic types of assessments, and we'll look at each one in turn. There are 3 basic elements for most of these assessments: the instructions to the student, the question itself, that is the STEM, and for those assessments that offer them, alternative choices. The cardinal rule to use when creating assessment items is that the onus of communication effectiveness falls on the test item writer. In other words, you must be clear in what you're asking for. We need to be testing the student on their ability to achieve the outcome, not on their ability to determine what the question was asking for. Detailed guidance on test item construction is found in the handout associated with this class. In this lesson, we will simply go over the key points. The most common type of test item is the multiple choice question. Partially due to its ease in grading and relatively objective nature, this type of assessment is very common in America, although you may find its use is far less common in other parts of the world. My experiences are that foreign students tend to have a tough time understanding how to approach these questions. It may be wise to include a classroom training session on testing methodology. When it comes to creating these type of items, clarity is the key. You only want to test one item per question. Ensure that all information necessary to answer the question exists in the STEM and doesn't require any of the alternatives. A way to do this is to attempt to answer the STEM without the benefit of the alternatives, as a short answer essay question. If you can't do that, there's information missing in the STEM. These questions can be easy or difficult depending on how closely the alternatives are aligned. It's a good idea to build into the alternatives distractors that are based on the way students frequently misinterpret the concepts. It helps with the analysis of teaching effectiveness. Multiple choice questions can be closed STEM, meaning the STEM itself is a complete sentence and the alternatives are complete sentence answers. Open STEM, in which the STEM is part of a sentence, typically ending in a colon, which is completed by adding in the correct alternative answer. They can be standard multiple choice, which asks for a specific piece of information, or except formatted questions, where all of the alternatives but one are in fact true. The student's job is to find the false alternative. When using the except formatted questions, ensure you highlight through bold and underlining or all capital letters or even the use of color to draw the student's attention to the word except. True-false questions should be used minimally. They are quite susceptible to guessing and can be misconstrued if they contain absolutes, always or never, are excessively convoluted, or are expressed negatively. Other than for recognition-style learning outcomes, these really should be avoided. Matching test items are an interesting way to gather a lot of assessment data in a small amount of space. The STEM instructions are provided above the columns, with questions being in the left column and answers in the right column. If there are many related answers, finding the correct ones makes this a far more difficult task. One of the ways to avoid guessing is to order the answers alphabetically or numerically so that the position doesn't give the respondent a clue as to the correct answer. Make sure both lists fit on the same page to avoid flipping errors as students move back and forth between two different pages. Completion test items are harder because students have to provide their own answers. It is also harder to score as there may be multiple words that act as an answer, and it requires more handwork to grade. There are three basic types of completion questions. The first is the classic complete the statement, where a blank is inserted somewhere in a single sentence. The student's task is to complete the sentence correctly by adding in that word or phrase. The second, answer the question, is really more of a short answer essay question that provides an answer space after the STEM. The student's task, as the name implies, is to answer the question. The third format, create a list from memory, requires students to complete a list in the form given. It can be parts on a diagram or steps or an overall procedure. Creating a complete the statement type of test item is relatively simple. Write out a factual statement and then delete the important concept from that statement. However, you must leave enough of the original statement so that the student knows what it is you're actually asking for. Essay items are aligned with the highest levels of mental processing. They require students to carefully mentally assess data and communicate their findings. Because of the very subjective nature of essays, it is wise to create model answers or grading rubrics prior to giving the assessment. Three of the most common types of essays are the compare and contrast for ideas or items, arguing a position, or describing a cause and effect relationship between factors. While essays are powerful assessment tools, they do take the greatest amount of instructor time in grading and can show the greatest variance in outcomes due to their somewhat subjective nature. The final type of test item is that of a physical or mental skill that must be performed in order to demonstrate achievement of the learning outcome. Best practice is to simulate the actual work conditions as closely as possible. Using this type of assessment means instructors must watch the performance one-on-one, which can increase assessment time and cause group learning to occur based on the repeated demonstration, thus making the latter students more proficient than the initial students. To create this type of assessment, the skills demonstrated must be ranked in importance and the assessment criteria and rubrics developed. Performance assessments can be based on the process, how the activity was accomplished, the product, judging only the end result, or some combination of the two. Because it deals with individual observations, this method of assessment also suffers from possible subjective bias. When doing assessment training, instructors are responsible for setting up the conditions for success. This means ensuring that the testing environment is neither too hot nor too cold, ensuring that whatever is needed for the assessment is in working order, whether it's a drill press or a computer. Instructors must review the testing protocol with the students prior to the assessment, making sure that they understand where to be and when, as well as what is expected of them and how they will be scored. The instructor must be involved in administering the testing, ending the testing, and putting away the materials. Finally, the instructor must be sure that the assessment is graded and recorded in a timely manner. The greater the time between performance and feedback in the form of grades, the less impact grading has on student performance in the long run. We've covered a fairly wide span of topics at an admittedly shallow level, but hopefully we have started you thinking about testing and outcome assessments. Realize that while cheating can never be completely eliminated, it can be diminished by how we act in the classroom. We know that in the tests, the items we use to assess student learning have to be directly linked to learning outcomes and at the appropriate Bloom's level. Finally, we hope you have a greater appreciation of what it takes to write good test items, and we know you will find the handout helpful. Congratulations! You've completed yet another class in our professional development series. We hope that you found it helpful, and we look forward to seeing you again next week when we will explore instructional methods, life beyond the lecture. Until then, keep practicing, and as always, have a wonderful day.